In this episode, we're going to take the whole PCI world that often feels like a scattered set of documents, acronyms, and organizations, and turn it into a simple mental map you can carry around without stress. Beginners usually hear people toss around terms like standards, programs, councils, and assessor roles, and it can feel like you are supposed to already know how it all fits together. When you do not, everything else becomes harder, because even a basic question can feel confusing if you are not sure which group owns what or which document applies to which situation. The goal today is to build a clear picture of the universe around this certification, including who sets expectations, who follows them, who validates them, and how the pieces connect. Once you can see that ecosystem as a connected system rather than a pile of names, you will make better decisions in both studying and test questions, because you will stop mixing up responsibilities and start recognizing the logic behind the structure. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first anchor in your map is the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, PCI SSC, because it functions like the center of gravity for PCI standards and supporting programs. When people say PCI, they often mean the broader ecosystem, but the council is a specific organization with a specific purpose, which is to manage and evolve security standards related to payment card data. It helps to think of the council as the place where the official rules live, where the rules get updated over time, and where programs exist to ensure the rules are applied consistently. That does not mean the council is the same thing as a card brand, and it does not mean the council is the same thing as a bank or a merchant. It is a standards body, which means it defines expectations and supports the community of organizations that must meet those expectations. When you hold that in your mind, a lot of confusion clears up because you stop assigning the council responsibilities that belong to other parties in the payment ecosystem. Next, you need to place the card brands in your mental map because their role is both important and commonly misunderstood. Card brands are not just logos on a card. They are organizations that have rules and programs tied to protecting the payment system. In many real situations, card brand programs influence enforcement, timelines, and reporting expectations, even though the technical security expectations are defined through PCI standards. Beginners sometimes assume PCI is a law, but it is better to think of it as an industry-driven set of requirements that can become mandatory through contracts and program rules. That means your map should show a flow where standards describe security expectations, while programs and contracts determine how organizations prove compliance. This distinction matters for exam questions because the test often cares about who requires what and who receives what, not just what a control is. When you are clear on that separation, you reduce the chance of choosing an answer that assigns authority to the wrong party. Now place the organizations that actually handle payment cards day to day, because they sit in the middle of the ecosystem and are often the focus of assessments. Merchants are organizations that accept payment cards, and they vary widely in size, complexity, and risk. Service providers are organizations that store, process, or transmit card data on behalf of others, or that provide services that can affect the security of that data. Acquirers and issuers are financial institutions that play key roles in moving money and authorizing transactions, and their expectations and contracts can drive compliance requirements for merchants and service providers. For your purposes as a beginner, the key is not memorizing every definition perfectly, but understanding that these parties have different responsibilities and different reporting relationships. Your mental map should show who is responsible for protecting card data in their environment and who is responsible for validating that protection. That clarity becomes a foundation for later topics like scoping, evidence, and reporting documents. Once you know who is in the ecosystem, you can begin mapping the documents and outputs that connect them. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, is a central document because it defines requirements for protecting cardholder data environments. In the ecosystem, it functions like a shared baseline for what secure handling should look like, regardless of industry. But the ecosystem also includes validation documents and reporting outputs, which help organizations demonstrate they meet those requirements. You will hear about self-assessment questionnaire, SAQ, paths, and report on compliance, ROC, paths, and you will also hear about attestation of compliance, AOC, documents that accompany validation results. The important part for mapping is recognizing that some documents describe requirements, while other documents describe validation and reporting. When you separate requirements from validation, the whole universe becomes easier to navigate because you stop treating every document as if it has the same purpose. Now let's place the QSA role in this universe, because it sits at an intersection that makes it especially sensitive to responsibility boundaries. A qualified security assessor, QSA, is an independent assessor role that is recognized within the PCI ecosystem to evaluate and report on an organization's compliance posture. The key idea is that a QSA is not just an auditor in a generic sense, and not just a security consultant either, even if the skills overlap. The QSA role exists because the ecosystem needs trusted validation, which means someone who can interpret requirements consistently, gather evidence, and produce defensible reporting. That role depends on professionalism, ethics, and independence, which is why the program has rules around how assessments are performed and how conclusions are supported. In your mental map, the QSA is a bridge between the organization being assessed and the parties that rely on the assessment results. Seeing it as a bridge helps you remember why evidence quality, scope accuracy, and clear reporting are so central to both the job and the exam. It also helps to understand that the PCI universe is not just about one standard, because the ecosystem includes related standards and programs that address different parts of payment security. Even if your exam focus is QSA work tied to PCI requirements, the broader universe includes ideas like payment application security, point-to-point encryption approaches, and practices for managing vulnerabilities. You do not need to become an expert in every related standard at once, but you do need to know that the universe is intentionally modular. Standards exist because different problem spaces require different guidance, and the Council supports that by maintaining multiple documents and programs. Beginners sometimes panic when they see how many names exist, but the confidence comes from recognizing that these documents are organized around purpose. Your map should not be a long list of titles. It should be a small set of categories, like requirements, validation, and specialized guidance, each with a clear role. A common confusion point is how enforcement works, because people often expect a single authority to police everything. In reality, enforcement tends to happen through business relationships and program requirements, which can vary depending on the merchant level, transaction volume, and risk profile. That means different organizations may be required to validate in different ways, using different paths, even though the security expectations are still anchored in the same standards. This is why you might see one company complete a questionnaire path, while another company must complete a full assessor-led report. The universe is designed to scale so that validation effort matches risk and impact. Your confidence comes from understanding that scaling logic rather than memorizing every possible rule. When you see a question about which path applies, your map should guide you to think about purpose and risk, not about guessing. Another confidence-building piece is understanding how terminology is used, because many PCI terms sound similar but refer to different things. For example, words like environment, scope, and boundary are related but not identical, and confusing them can lead you to misunderstand a scenario. The universe relies on precise language because assessments must be repeatable and defensible. When the ecosystem describes a cardholder data environment, it is describing the systems and networks that store, process, or transmit card data, plus any connected systems that can impact security. Scope describes what is included in the assessment based on that environment and the connected impact. Boundaries describe how that environment is separated from other parts of the organization. These distinctions show up everywhere, and your mental map should connect them so you can move from one to the next naturally. When you are clear on language, you are less likely to be thrown off by exam wording. As you build your map, you should also place service provider relationships clearly, because modern payment environments often rely on third parties. A merchant might outsource processing, hosting, support, or security services, and each of those choices affects the assessment universe. The PCI ecosystem expects organizations to manage and validate these relationships, not simply assume the vendor has it covered. That means your map should include the idea that compliance and security responsibilities are shared in practice, but accountability cannot be entirely outsourced. Even if a vendor handles a system, the organization still needs to understand what data is handled, where it flows, and what evidence exists that controls are working. This is why you will hear about responsibilities being defined through agreements, documentation, and validation. The universe is built to handle complexity, but only if the parties are clear about who does what. Confidence also comes from understanding how updates and changes fit into the universe, because standards evolve and the ecosystem adapts. When standards are updated, organizations must adjust how they interpret requirements, how they gather evidence, and how they report results. This does not mean everything changes at once, but it does mean the ecosystem is living, not static. For exam readiness, the key is not chasing every minor change, but understanding how change is managed, such as through versioning, transition periods, and updated guidance. Your mental map should include the idea that the council maintains standards over time and supports consistent interpretation through guidance and program rules. When you understand that, you can answer questions about why certain expectations exist and how they are meant to be applied. It also keeps you from treating PCI as a frozen snapshot in time. One practical way to test your map is to narrate a simple story of how an organization proves compliance from start to finish. You can imagine a merchant that accepts card payments, determines what systems are involved, identifies the relevant validation path, gathers evidence, and produces the required reporting output. As you speak through that story, you should be able to place each party and each document in the right position. If you stumble, it usually means a piece of the map is fuzzy, which gives you a clear target for review. This kind of narrative practice is powerful because it mirrors how exam questions are written, with realistic scenarios that require you to understand relationships. The more clearly you can tell the story, the more confidently you can answer questions that twist the details. Confidence is not about memorizing a diagram. It is about being able to reason through the ecosystem fluidly. To close, mapping the PCI SSC universe is about turning a confusing set of names into a small set of relationships you truly understand. The council sits at the center as the standards body. The card brands and related programs influence enforcement and validation expectations, and the organizations that handle payments must protect data and prove they are doing it. Documents exist for different purposes, with some defining requirements and others capturing validation and reporting. The QSA role sits as a trusted bridge that must remain evidence-minded, consistent, and ethically grounded. When you hold this map in your head, you stop feeling lost in jargon and you start seeing why each piece exists and how it connects to the others. That is what total confidence looks like, and it becomes a foundation you will use in every later topic, from scoping to evidence to final reporting.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.